Hi, I'm Maya. My sister pushed me out of my wheelchair in front of everyone at the pep rally, then told the whole school I fell because I was too weak to control my chair. The teachers believed her without question. Even my dad told me to stop causing problems. For a while, I listened and stayed quiet. But that was the last time I swallowed my words, because what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I kept everything. The recording. The messages. The journal entries. And 30 minutes later, they all heard the truth play out in a room that finally couldn't look away. So tell me, have you ever been pushed so far that you stopped apologizing for standing up for yourself? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The first bell hadn't even rung at Westridge High when the hallways were already packed with students. It was one of those crisp October mornings in Springfield where the air felt electric with possibility. The gymnasium buzzed with excitement for homecoming week, streamers in royal blue and silver hanging from every corner. Everyone seemed too caught up in their own worlds to notice me navigating the crowd. That's how it usually went. I didn't move with the flow, I moved through it like water finding gaps between stones. Students rushed past, carrying posters and spirit wear for the assembly. Mr. Daniels, the history teacher, nodded in my direction without making actual eye contact. I kept my hands steady on my wheels, maneuvering around a backpack someone had carelessly dropped in the middle of the hall. My shoulders already ached, but I didn't say anything. They'd asked me to help organize the program booklets, not speak, not present, just sort paper into neat stacks. I'd spent hours the night before making sure every page was perfectly aligned, treating each booklet like it mattered. They called it being part of the team behind the scenes. I called it being conveniently invisible. That morning at home, Dad had fussed over Olivia's hair, styling it into perfect waves while complimenting how photogenic she looked for her speech. Olivia soaked up the attention, of course. That was her specialty. She was senior class president, captain of the debate team, the older sister who everyone said was going places. What remained unspoken but hung in the air was that I was just there. The supporting character in her coming-of-age story. The sister with the wheelchair who made Olivia look even more impressive for being so supportive of me in public. I had been given a small part in the assembly, just 2 sentences thanking the volunteers. Simple, but it was something. I had practiced more than necessary, rewriting those lines until they sounded like me, not words handed down by the student council. But when I checked the program backstage that morning, my part was gone. Completely erased, like I'd never been included at all. Olivia stood nearby, discussing lighting cues with Mrs. Rivera, the drama teacher. She didn't look my way. But I caught the slight curl of her lips before she turned her attention back to the conversation. I held the program a moment longer, then carefully placed it back exactly where I found it. Peacekeeping, that's what I told myself. It wasn't worth causing a scene. But something in my chest tightened, a familiar knot that never quite went away. Later, as students gathered by the gymnasium entrance, the noise around me faded into background static. I was waiting for my cue to wheel to the faculty section when I felt something shift in the air. A presence behind me, the subtle change in temperature that happens when someone invades your space. Try not to embarrass yourself this time, Olivia murmured as she passed, her voice so low only I could hear it. She bent down as if she was checking my footrest, but her hand moved to the frame behind my wheel. With a quick, practiced motion, she pushed. My chair pitched sideways. There was no time to brace myself. My body tilted hard to the right, and I hit the polished floor on my hip and shoulder. Pain shot through me, but even worse was the instant flood of humiliation as I looked up at the circle of faces that formed around me. For one heartbeat, no one said anything. Then came the gasps, the shuffling feet, but no one rushed forward, no one shouted, no one stepped in. She fell, Olivia said loudly, backing away with a perfectly concerned expression. She does that sometimes. Her arms just get tired. The lie landed harder than the fall itself, clean and confident like a slap. A few students nodded knowingly. Others glanced at their phones, already bored. No one looked directly at me as I lay there, cheek pressed against the cold floor. I felt something strange, not just pain but recognition. This scene, this moment, I'd been here before. I remembered being 9, at Lakeside Park behind our old house. Olivia had been in charge of pushing my chair that day. I remember her laugh as she let go on the small hill, just to see what would happen. I'd rolled halfway down, terrified and helpless, before she caught up and said sorry with those big, fake eyes. I never told Dad. I didn't want to cause problems. Now here I was, different day, different excuse, but the same story playing out again. The crowd shifted. Miss Harmon, the school counselor, hurried over, flustered and clearly unsure of what she'd missed. Olivia was already crouching beside me, helping lift me up as if she hadn't been the one to send me down. "Are you okay?" she asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. I nodded once. I didn't trust my voice not to break. She brushed invisible dirt from my sleeves and smiled like a concerned sister should. Her performance was flawless, an Academy Award-worthy display of sisterly concern. I was escorted inside by Ms. Harmon, who wheeled me herself without asking if I needed help. No one questioned what really happened. No one asked Olivia a single uncomfortable question. Later, while I sat alone in the resource room pretending to work on a chemistry assignment, my phone buzzed with a text from Dad. "Hope you're being careful today. Please don't cause any drama for your sister. It's a big day for her with the college scouts attending." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I stared at the message, unable to form a reply. Which part hurt more? The fall? The lie? Or the fact that my job was apparently to stay silent for someone else's comfort? I slipped my phone back into my pocket without responding. That night, I sat on my bed, wheels locked, the house finally quiet. I opened my hand and there it was, a program booklet I had folded the night before, crumpled and pressed into my palm from the fall. I smoothed it once, then tucked it into my desk drawer. The booklet disappeared from sight, but the weight of it didn't leave my hand. The next morning, I wheeled myself to the nurse's office without asking permission. No one stopped me. That's the thing about being invisible. They only see you when they need something, and right then, nobody needed me. The nurse, Mrs. Chen, didn't ask many questions. She examined the bruise blooming on my elbow and quietly applied antiseptic. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the small water stains that formed patterns like islands on a map. Outside the window, I could see students hanging banners for the pep rally, laughing and high-fiving like nothing had happened. "Going to bandage this up now. It might bruise more later, so ice it when you get home, alright?" Mrs. Chen said, gently securing a gauze pad. I nodded, my voice still hiding somewhere deep inside my chest. From the hallway came the crackle of the PA system. "Attention students and faculty. Please excuse the interruption. We'd like to congratulate Olivia Mitchell for being selected as this year's recipient of the Westridge High School Character and Leadership Award. She's being called to the main office now for her photo with the superintendent." The announcement echoed through the quiet office like a cruel joke. The hallway outside erupted in cheers and applause. I heard someone shout, "No one deserves it more." Another added, "She's literally the best person in this school." My fingers curled around the armrests of my chair. Character and Leadership Award. My sister had pushed me onto the ground in front of witnesses and was now getting an award for her exemplary character. The irony burned worse than the scrape on my arm. "Twist the knife, smile while you're doing it, that's always been her specialty," I whispered to myself. Mrs. Chen patted my shoulder, probably thinking I was upset about the fall. "You'll be okay, sweetheart. These things happen." But this didn't just happen. It was calculated, performed with the precision of someone who had done it before and gotten away with it. I didn't respond. Later, after third period, I rolled into English class. Ms. Winters was organizing papers at her desk, her geometric patterned dress and bold lipstick making her look like she'd stepped out of a different era. I waited until the last student left for lunch, then approached her desk. "Ms. Winters?" My voice cracked slightly. "I need to tell you something." She looked up, slightly startled. "Sure, Maya. What's going on?" I hesitated, my mouth suddenly dry and the words feeling heavier than they should. "I didn't fall this morning. Olivia pushed me." She pretended to adjust my chair, but she made it tip over. Ms. Winters' eyes flickered, not with shock but with something more calculated. She looked down at her desk, then back at me with a tight smile. "Oh, well, I'm sure she didn't mean anything by it. Olivia would never intentionally hurt you." "But she did," I insisted, my voice stronger now. "This isn't the first time." Ms. Winters' voice dropped to a hushed tone. "Look, Maya, it's homecoming week. Everyone's a little on edge. Let's not blow something out of proportion, alright? Olivia has been under a lot of pressure with college applications and all her responsibilities." There it was, twist 3. A polite way of saying, "Sit down, be quiet, don't make trouble." She turned back to her papers, effectively dismissing me. I sat there for a moment, staring at her back, feeling something shift inside me. This wasn't just about a fall anymore. This was about years of being silenced, of watching people choose the easier story over the true one. Later, I opened my laptop in the library and drafted an email to Principal Garza. I typed everything, what happened that morning, what Olivia had done before, even the deleted lines from the program. I had it all written out, every detail laid bare. But my finger hovered over the send button for too long. What if they didn't believe me either? What if this made things worse? What if they called my dad, and he took her side again? I hit delete. The screen went blank, and the silence wasn't just outside me anymore, it was seeping into my bones. Down the hall, music echoed from the auditorium. It was rehearsal time for the homecoming rally. I wasn't scheduled to attend, but I went. Anyway. I slipped in through the side entrance and parked in the shadows near the back row. On stage, Olivia walked confidently across the platform, practicing her smile for the cameras. A teacher whispered to someone nearby, "She's such a role model for the younger students." I wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat. Olivia turned, saw me in the corner, and held my gaze for just a second. Then she smiled, not the public smile she wore for teachers and college scouts, but a small, private one that said, "I know what I did, and you won't say a word." Not one hair out of place. Not one crack in her mask. They were applauding. The version of her they wanted to see, the girl who volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends, who organized food drives, who always had the perfect answer in class discussions. Not the girl who knew exactly how hard to push before the world looked away. I rested my hand on the armrest of my chair and tightened my grip. Maybe no one else would remember what happened, but I would. And I started by remembering what she did the last time. It wasn't the fall itself that stuck in my memory from childhood. It was the way she smiled after, the same smile I saw today in the auditorium. Calm. Untouchable. When I was 8, we were at Silver Lake Resort for our annual family vacation. Dad had booked the place because of some corporate discount through his work. Olivia had begged to have the bigger room with the lake view. I got the pull-out couch near the noisy ice machine that rattled all night. The morning we visited the resort pool, I stayed at the edge like always. I enjoyed watching the water but felt uncomfortable with all the noise and splashing. My back hurt that day, I remember that clearly. I was sipping a juice box, content to observe, when Olivia appeared behind me. "Come closer," she said. "You can dangle your feet in." I shook my head. "Oh, come on, don't be such a baby." The next thing I felt was a sudden jolt forward, my chair tipping toward the water's edge. The cold shock as I hit the pool, my hands flailing before a lifeguard pulled me out. "She's fine," Olivia said, laughing like it was all a silly accident. "She just needed to cool off." No one asked me what happened. Dad fussed over my wet clothes and warned me not to catch a cold. He told Olivia to be more careful, but that was it. That moment didn't just get buried, it got completely rewritten. Now, over a decade later, I found myself cast in the same role, the one who got pushed and then told to smile through it. At lunch the next day, I looked for my friend Zoe. We always sat at the corner table near the vending machines, the one where you had to hit the selection button twice to get the machine to register your choice. But today, Zoe wasn't there. I spotted her sitting with a group from the yearbook committee, including Olivia. I wheeled over quietly. "Zoe?" She looked up, startled, then smiled, but it wasn't her usual smile. It was tight, uncomfortable. I could read it instantly, the kind of smile you give when you're hoping someone won't sit next to you. I began. She leaned closer, lowered her voice. "I just can't be in the middle of this, Maya. I'm sorry." I felt my heart sink. But my face remained calm. "So this is too much now?" "No, it's not that." She glanced toward Olivia, who was pretending not to listen. "It's just, people are saying you're making a bigger deal than it is, and Olivia, she's got that scholarship thing going on right now. I just can't get caught up. Like I was a storm that might sweep others into my chaos." I nodded once, rolled back, and didn't say another word. That was twist 4, the whispers had started. You could feel it in the way people glanced and then looked away. I was no longer just the quiet girl in the wheelchair. I was a subject of conversation, an inconvenience that made others uncomfortable. By 5th period, I passed the main hallway digital display board. It was running. A slideshow titled, "Homecoming Heroes, Students Making a Difference." Photos from the decoration committee flipped by one after another, hanging banners, setting up the voting booth for homecoming court, arranging flowers for the teacher's lounge. I'd been there. I had helped design the digital ballot system, organized the voting schedule, even stayed late to help Mr. Reyes set up the audiovisual equipment. But as the photos cycled through, I realized I wasn't in a single one. Cropped out or simply not photographed at all. I checked the credits at the bottom, thanks to our amazing volunteers, Olivia Mitchell, Jason, Priya, Dion, Marco, Layla. No Maya. I approached Mr. Reyes from the tech department, trying to keep my voice casual. "Hey, Mr. Reyes, do you know if the full group photos from the setup got uploaded?" He barely looked up from his tablet. "Oh, there might have been a glitch with the files. These things can be temperamental." "Yeah, probably just a tech issue," I muttered as he walked away. Nothing was corrected. Twist 5 landed soft but cut deep. I rolled into the library and found my usual spot by the window where afternoon light filtered through the blinds in golden stripes. I pulled out my journal, the one with the worn corners and a constellation map on the cover, and wrote. They erased my body. They erased my name. But they can't erase my memory. I stared at those words for a long time. This wasn't about a fall. This wasn't even about Olivia. This was about the silence that followed, the comfort people chose over truth. The way they'd rather believe someone like my sister, poised, smiling, camera ready, than confront the idea that someone like her could be cruel. It was about a system built on pretending things didn't happen. About what happens when the ones who are supposed to see you choose not to. When I returned to my locker later, Olivia was walking by with her entourage, a group of students who seemed to orbit around her like satellites. One of them laughed too loudly at something she said. Another complimented her speech for the rally. She looked like she belonged on a television show about perfect high school students. Our eyes met briefly. She didn't even flinch. That was her power, she didn't need to explain or deny. She just had to keep moving forward as if nothing had happened and let everyone else fill in the blanks for her. You're not the only one who remembers things, I whispered under my breath as they passed. That night after dinner, I sat in my room with just my desk lamp on. Dad was downstairs watching sports highlights, the volume a little too loud. I reached under my bed and pulled out a shoebox, edges worn soft from years of handling. Inside were things I'd kept, birthday cards with insincere messages, screenshots of texts where Olivia had said one thing to me and something completely different to others, a program from a middle school concert where she'd accidentally knocked over my music stand right before my solo. Things that seemed small in isolation but formed a pattern when placed together. It's time I remembered everything, I whispered, lifting the lid completely off. But I wasn't the only one holding on to memories that hurt. That night, I stayed up past midnight, the box open beside me as I journaled without stopping, stream of consciousness style. As the ink flowed across the page, memory after memory surfaced, not just Olivia's actions but the dismissals that followed. She didn't mean it, they'd say. Or worse, you're too sensitive. I wrote down every instance I could recall, times she'd pinched me under the table during family dinners, then smiled sweetly at our grandmother. The day she told my science teacher I'd copied her project even though I'd spent weeks on my own work, the countless times she'd taken credit for ideas I'd shared at home. These weren't childhood pranks or simple sibling rivalry. They were calculated moves by someone who had learned that her word would always carry more weight than mine. The next morning, I arrived at school early. It wasn't planned, Dad had an early meeting, so I got dropped off just as the sky was shifting from deep blue to pale gray. The hallways were quiet, almost peaceful. As I turned the corner past the west stairwell, I heard the squeak of wheels against tile. Mr. Garcia, the head custodian, was adjusting the leg of a wobbly desk near the water fountain. He looked up when he saw me and nodded once. I gave a small smile, ready to roll past him like usual, when he spoke. I saw what happened, he said simply. I paused, my hands going still on my wheels. That day by the gym doors. I was changing the trash liner by the side entrance. I saw your sister touch the chair, then I saw you fall. My heart began to pound harder. I tried to find words, but he continued. I tried to tell myself it wasn't what it looked like, he went on. But it wasn't the push that convinced me. It was the way you got back into that chair afterward, like it wasn't the first time. Twist 6 didn't hit me like a blow. It settled into my spine like a missing piece clicking into place. He stood up slowly, brushing dust from his hands. No one's ever asked me what I saw. They never do. I looked at him, trying to understand. He wasn't angry or pitying. He was just witnessing. Why are you telling me now? I asked. He shrugged slightly. You looked like someone who finally needed to hear it. Those words stayed with me all day. After classes, I went home and tried to distract myself with homework, but my mind kept returning to what Mr. Garcia had said. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through family photos, holiday gatherings, school events, vacations where Olivia was always front and center. If I appeared at all, I was usually off to the side or slightly blurred. A little after 8 p.m., my phone rang. It was Aunt Corinne, Dad's younger sister who lived across the country and visited maybe once a year. I hesitated, then answered. Hey, kiddo, she said warmly. Just checking in. Your dad mentioned you had a little accident at school? I tried not to sigh. Yeah, something like that. There was a pause, then, she didn't do something again, did she? I froze. Wait, what? Aunt Corinne exhaled slowly. I probably shouldn't say anything, but when I visited for your 10th birthday, Olivia told your dad I broke his favorite golf trophy. I didn't, I'd never touch his things without asking. But she cried so convincingly, and he believed her without question. I got the cold shoulder that entire weekend. Why would she do that? I asked, even though I already knew. She always knew how to cry just right, make people feel like they had to take her side. You know what I mean? Yes, I whispered. God, yes. Twist 7 was like a hidden thread pulled loose. It unraveled more than just one memory. Sweetheart, Corinne added, her voice softer now, she's had this in her for a long time. Don't let it twist you into knots. But it already had. After we hung up, I sat alone in my dimly lit room, the hum of the heating vent the only sound. This wasn't about one fall. This wasn't even just about Olivia. This was about power and the way it cloaked itself in charm, about how people didn't want to confront uncomfortable truths if it meant disrupting the stories they preferred. I took out a notebook and started listing names. Damian Rodriguez, publicly called out for stealing answers on a test, even though the teacher later found Olivia had misgraded his paper. Layla Johnson, removed from the lead in the spring musical after an anonymous complaint about her commitment. Marcus Kim, overlooked for student council despite winning more votes in the primary. Each one had been subtly erased, just like me, and each time, the school moved on as if nothing had happened. I wasn't just a victim, I was sitting inside a system that made room for this behavior. At midnight, I opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then started typing. I created a folder and named it, Things They Won't Talk About. Inside, I opened a document titled, The Fall, and wrote every detail, no embellishments, just truth. The way her fingers pressed against the back of my chair. The sudden shift of weight. The expressions of those who turned away. I didn't send it anywhere, but I saved it, and I read it again. Once. Twice. Then I highlighted one line and made it bold. Sometimes the quiet ones remember everything. The school didn't know it yet, but I was done being quiet. As I rolled through the front hallway the next morning, sunlight hit the trophy case just right, making the glass gleam like something sacred. Olivia's photo was prominently displayed in the center, a professional shot from last spring's honors banquet where she smiled with perfect teeth, head tilted at the practiced angle that made her look both approachable and accomplished. No hint of cruelty behind that polished exterior. Beneath the glass, someone had placed a single white rose. For a moment, I thought it was meant for her, another token of the school's endless admiration. Then I noticed the small card, in memory of Coach Phillips, 1970 to 2023. The flower wasn't for Olivia, but somehow she still managed to be centered in the frame, overshadowing even a memorial. Earlier that morning, I'd stood in the kitchen with Dad. The rhythmic tapping of his spoon against his coffee mug was the only sound between us. I wanted to speak, had rehearsed what to say, how to bring it up without sounding accusatory. Something happened with Olivia, I finally said, my voice steadier than I expected. He didn't look up, just kept stirring, then set the spoon down with a tired clink. Just let it go, Maya. Don't make things harder for her right now. He said it as if Olivia was the one struggling, as if whatever happened must have been a misunderstanding where she was the victim. Twist 8 wasn't loud, it didn't come with shouting or slamming doors. It was the quiet certainty that even my father would rather not see me clearly. By the time I reached first period, that ache had folded itself into something colder, something harder to shake. The day dragged on. In chemistry, Zoe's name was now missing from our lab partner list. What happened to Zoe? I asked Ms. Patel as she distributed the day's materials. Oh, she's been moved to Mr. Benson's section, she said casually, not looking up from her clipboard. Apparently she requested it. Schedule conflict. It shouldn't have hurt, but it did. At lunch, I sat alone again. The cafeteria seemed louder than usual, clattering trays, squeaking chairs, bursts of laughter that felt pointed even when they weren't directed at me. Across the room, Zoe was sitting with Olivia's friends, laughing at something someone said. She glanced my way once, briefly, then dropped her gaze to her plate. A girl passed my table and whispered just loud enough to be heard, "Drama queen." Twist 9 didn't sting because it was cruel. It stung because it was easy for people to say, easy for them to believe. I stayed in the cafeteria longer than necessary, picking at my sandwich, trying to focus on my breathing rather than the knot in my stomach. When I finally moved to take my tray to the return line, I noticed something tucked underneath it, a folded napkin. I unfolded it slowly, cautiously. Inside, written in small, careful print, I saw what happened. You weren't wrong. Twist 10 hit like a beam of light through heavy fog. Someone else had seen. Someone else had known, and while they hadn't spoken up at the time, they were watching, remembering. I didn't know who J was, it could have been any of the quiet faces pretending not to notice me, but suddenly I didn't feel quite so alone. I placed the note carefully into my folder, joining my written account and the list of names. I wasn't trying to build a case, not yet, but I was building something. For the first time in days, I felt a small smile form. It wasn't joy, it was recognition. They're not all asleep, I whispered to myself. Not all of them. In the hallway. After lunch, I passed the auditorium where Olivia and the student council were rehearsing their speeches for the homecoming rally. They laughed with the easy confidence of people who've never had to question their place. Olivia didn't look my way. She didn't need to. I stopped for a moment, watching them through the open door. My hand rested on the wheel of my chair as I whispered, "They think I'm too weak. I think they forgot how steel is forged." I wasn't planning to speak tomorrow, not with words. After the final bell, I wheeled past Mr. Garcia, who was mopping near the science wing. He gave me a slight nod, and I returned it. No words were exchanged, but understanding passed between us. He knew I was staying behind, and he wouldn't question why. I moved down the empty hallway toward the audiovisual room. My wheels echoed against the tiled floor, the sound bouncing off the walls of lockers. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows across my path. The A/V room was unlocked, just as I'd hoped. The tech team had been setting up for tomorrow's rally and hadn't secured everything yet. Inside, the control panel for the school speaker system glowed with tiny lights. The recording equipment, used for morning announcements and special events, was still connected. I didn't have to guess if it had captured what I hoped it did. Our school prided itself on documenting everything for the yearbook and school website. I found the digital archive, scrolled through recent recordings, and selected the file marked Homecoming Committee, Wednesday Prep. I pressed play. At first, there was just background noise, chairs scraping, papers shuffling, people calling out task assignments. Then Olivia's voice came through clear and unmistakable, speaking to someone in a lower tone than her usual public voice. "It's not like anyone's going to believe her anyway," she said, followed by a soft laugh. "She's too pathetic to fight back. Always has been." I sat perfectly still, letting the words wash over me. Twist 11 was cold and sharp, but also undeniable. There was no question of interpretation, no way to spin it as a misunderstanding. It was her voice, her words, her true thoughts when she thought no one who mattered was listening. I downloaded the file, renamed it Evidence, then carefully closed the system down. I didn't rush as I made my way back to my locker. I wanted to breathe in this moment, the calm before everything changed. The hallway was nearly empty now, just the distant sounds of the basketball team practicing in the gym and a janitor's vacuum running somewhere down the hall. Then I saw her, Olivia, standing at my locker, her back to me, trying the combination. She didn't expect me to catch her there. When she turned and saw me approaching, she startled slightly, then quickly composed herself into a casual smile. "Oh," she said, holding up my journal as if she'd just found it rather than been searching for it. "I thought I might have left my calculator in here from when I helped you organize last week." There was no calculator in her hands, just my journal, where I'd been documenting everything, the patterns, the incidents, the names of others she'd undermined over the years. Twist 12 wasn't loud, but this time I didn't freeze. I held her gaze steadily. "Thanks," I said evenly, "but I've already backed everything up." Her smile faltered for just a second, a tiny crack in the perfect mask. Then she set the journal down on top of my backpack and walked away, arms crossed like the temperature had suddenly dropped. I didn't call after her. I didn't need to. That evening at home, I organized everything across my desk, laptop open to the audio file, journal. Beside it, the napkin note, the list of names. Mine wasn't the only story here. There was Priya, who mysteriously lost her spot as valedictorian after challenging one of Olivia's statements in debate class. There was Eli, who was removed from the school newspaper after writing an editorial that indirectly criticized student council spending. There was Nadia, who transferred schools mid-year after weeks of subtle exclusion. We were different, but the pattern was the same. Olivia didn't create the system, but she had learned to thrive within it, to use its blind spots and biases to her advantage. I stared at my phone, thumb hovering over the email app. I could send everything to Principal Garza right now. I could post the audio to the school's online forum. But something in me wanted more than just exposure from a distance. I wanted them to look me in the eye first, to hear the truth while standing just feet away from the girl they'd been protecting all this time. There's a difference between reading about something and witnessing it. Tomorrow, I wanted them to witness. I printed the most damning page from my journal, my detailed account of the fall, with timestamps and names of potential witnesses. That went into a folder labeled simply, Truth. The audio file was loaded onto my phone and backed up to my cloud account. No single piece of evidence could be erased without others remaining. Looking up at my ceiling, I slowly closed the folder. Tomorrow wasn't just a plan. It was a reckoning. "They're about to hear what silence sounds like when it stops obeying," I whispered to the quiet air of my room. Sleep came easier than I expected that night. There was something calming about finally taking action after years of swallowing words. The morning light seemed sharper somehow as I rolled across the school's front entrance. The auditorium loomed ahead, already filling with students for the homecoming rally. Inside, rows of chairs were arranged in neat lines, teachers standing at the edges with clipboards, looking both bored and vigilant. The stage was decorated with the school colors, green and gold banners hanging from the rafters, a podium draped with the school crest. A long banner stretched across the back wall, Westridge High, Excellence, Integrity, Community. Olivia stood backstage, checking her note cards one last time. Her hair was styled in loose waves, her green blazer perfectly pressed, her expression serene and confident. She smiled warmly as Principal Garza adjusted the microphone stand, the same smile she used when accepting awards or posing for yearbook photos. The smile that lied. I stayed at the back of the auditorium, waiting. In my lap rested my folder, sealed but ready. The wheels of my chair made the faintest sound against the carpet as I positioned myself in a spot where I could see everyone, and where everyone could see me when the time came. Principal Garza stepped up to the podium and tapped the microphone twice. "Before we begin our homecoming announcements," he said, adjusting his glasses, "one of our students has asked to say a few words. Please give her your attention." Heads turned, confused. This wasn't on the program. Olivia looked up from her notes, a slight frown crossing her features. I moved forward, the sea of students parting to let me through. There was no ramp to the stage, of course, another oversight in a long history of them, so I positioned myself in the open area directly in front of the first row. The air shifted. Whispers stalled. Someone near the back row dropped their phone with a dull thud. "I was told I fell," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "Because I'm weak." The silence in the room was absolute, like the moment between heartbeats. But I didn't fall. I was pushed. Somewhere to my left, a chair creaked as someone shifted their weight. Principal Garza's expression changed from polite interest to confusion. "I have been pushed and erased and silenced for years," I continued. "And I know how easy it is to disappear when you don't fit what people want to see." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "But more than that, I have proof." I tapped the screen. A soft click, and then Olivia's voice filled the auditorium, clear and cutting. "It's not like anyone's going to believe her anyway. She's too pathetic to fight back. Always has been." Twist 13 hit the room like a wave of cold water. Gasps rippled across the audience. Ms. Winters, who had dismissed me days earlier, looked up from her phone, frozen in place. A boy in the third row whispered loudly to his friend, "Did she really just say that?" Olivia stepped forward from backstage, her face flushed. That's taken out of context," she stammered, her composure cracking. Principal Garza held up his hand, stopping her approach. I didn't wait for permission to continue. I picked up my folder and held it out to Mr. Reyes, who had moved closer during the recording. "That's all," I said simply, and then I turned. I didn't rush. I didn't stumble. I just wheeled myself toward the exit because I wasn't trying to win the room. I was trying to remind it what truth sounds like when it stops asking for permission to be heard. Near the door, Jason, from my English class, fell into step beside me. His breath came quick, his eyes wide. "You did it," he whispered, the letter J suddenly making sense. "Not yet," I replied, "but the silence is broken." "That's a start." We didn't say more. The noise in the auditorium behind us grew, no longer the polite, structured applause of a school assembly but the fragmented sounds of a system recalibrating, confused voices, demands for explanation, the unmistakable tone of authority figures trying to regain control. As we passed the front office, I could hear Principal Garza's voice over the PA system, "Olivia Mitchell, please report to the administrative office immediately." He hadn't muted the microphone fully, the entire school heard the summons. The hallway outside the principal's office was unnaturally quiet, the kind of quiet that wraps itself around your spine and waits. I sat there, my folder balanced on my lap, earbuds in but no music playing, just the quiet hum of white noise to mask the sounds of administrative chaos unfolding around me. I had been called in right after Olivia. I wasn't sure what to expect. Perhaps more dismissal, more excuses, more protection of the status quo. But I was done hiding, done minimizing, done making myself smaller to make room for lies. Inside the office, voices rose and fell. I could make out fragments now. "This is ridiculous, it's obviously fake," Olivia's voice, still trying to sound controlled but with an edge of panic. "We take these allegations very seriously," Principal Garza, measured but firm. "Look at this email she sent to the newspaper last month, said she'd expose me one day. She's obsessed." Olivia again, papers rustling. Twist 14, a forged email. I could picture it without seeing it, vague enough to raise suspicion, specific enough to cast doubt on my credibility. Clever. Cold. Then Principal Garza's voice again, "Regardless of any email, we have the recording, Olivia. That's your voice. We've had the A/V department verify it. It's fake. Anyone can manipulate audio these days. You know that. She sounded almost desperate now. And she hates me. She's always hated me. That's not a crime. There was a pause, then footsteps. The door opened. Maya, Principal Garza said, his face drawn. Please come in. I wheeled into the office slowly, back straight, eyes forward. Olivia sat across from his desk, legs crossed at the ankle, hands clutched in her lap. Her expression was carefully composed, but the redness around her eyes betrayed her. I understand you have more evidence to submit, Principal Garza said, his tone neutral but his eyes alert. I nodded once. Yes. I handed him the folder and pointed to the tab labeled Witnesses. Timestamped statements from people who saw what happened before and after the fall. I never accessed any equipment without permission. The audio came from the school's own archives. He reviewed the documents, lips pressed tight, then looked at me directly. This is very serious, Maya. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Twist 15 landed like a weight. I did, I said simply. To Ms. Winters. To Dad. No one listened. Before he could respond, the door opened again. Jason stood there, phone in hand, not waiting for permission. I have something too, he said, his voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. Olivia's head snapped up, her eyes widening slightly. Jason walked to the desk and held out his phone. On the screen was a video, shot from behind a pillar near the gym entrance. It showed Olivia approaching my chair, the slight push, my fall, and most damning of all, her satisfied expression as she stepped back. I filmed it because I was working on a documentary about school events, Jason explained. I caught this by accident. She told me to delete it. He looked directly at Olivia. I didn't. Olivia's composure finally cracked completely. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She looked from Principal Garza to Jason to me, then down at her lap. The silence that followed wasn't the kind I'd grown used to, the suffocating, helpless kind that came with being erased. This was silence with consequence, the kind that precedes change. Principal Garza took a deep breath. Olivia, you're suspended until we complete a full investigation. I'll be contacting the district office about further actions. She finally reacted. You're suspending me, she snapped, voice rising. For what? A little nudge? That's it? He looked tired but resolute. For lying. For intimidation. For creating a hostile environment. For violation of our student code of conduct. Dad arrived sometime during this exchange. I hadn't heard him come in, but suddenly he was there, standing in the doorway. He looked at Olivia, then at me, and, for the first time I could remember, he didn't immediately jump to her defense. He just stood there, silent, hollow, like a man realizing he didn't know either of his daughters as well as he thought. I didn't stay to watch Olivia's further protests. I didn't want to witness her unraveling or claim victory over her pain. I just turned and wheeled out of the office. The hallway was busier now, students moving between classes. A few looked up. As I passed, their expressions a mix of curiosity and something new, respect, maybe. Not the pity I was used to, but recognition. I passed the trophy case again, but this time I didn't look at Olivia's photo. I kept moving forward. Back at my locker, I reached for the combination lock but paused. There, taped to the metal door, was another napkin, folded into the shape of a small star. No name, no note, but I understood its meaning perfectly. I smiled, not because the hurt was gone or because everything was suddenly fixed, but because someone had seen, and that recognition, that simple acknowledgement of my truth, felt like the first real breath after years underwater. When they asked me later if I would speak at the special assembly about inclusion and respect, I didn't hesitate. There was no tremble in my answer, no urge to make myself smaller. I said yes, because the silence I had hidden behind for so long no longer belonged to me. It had transformed into something else entirely, a voice that had been waiting patiently to be heard. That morning, I arrived at school earlier than usual. The auditorium hummed with anticipation, not the nervous kind I'd grown accustomed to, but something electric and alive. This wasn't about approval or applause anymore. This was about reclaiming space that had always been mine to occupy. Backstage, student volunteers adjusted microphones and taped wires to the floor while teachers reviewed note cards and timing cues. I wasn't there as someone handed the smallest job, kept out of sight. I was a featured speaker. For once, no one tried to guide me to a corner or offered help I hadn't asked for. The stage manager, Ellie, directed me to the center of the platform where a ramp had been installed overnight. We should have done this years ago, she said, not with pity but with the straightforward acknowledgement of an obvious truth. Let me know if you need anything adjusted. I nodded, taking my place behind the podium that had been lowered to the right height. As I settled in, I noticed something resting on the wooden surface, a folded napkin shaped like a swan. Not just any fold, but the intricate design I'd taught during an origami workshop last semester, the one where Olivia had taken credit for organizing even though it had been my idea from the start. I turned slightly, catching Jason's eyewear. He stood with the tech crew. He smiled and gave me a subtle thumbs up. The 5 days since the recording played had transformed the school in ways I was still processing. Olivia remained suspended, her college recommendations under review. She hadn't returned to classes, and rumors circulated that she might transfer to finish her senior year elsewhere. I didn't follow the gossip, her journey wasn't mine to track anymore. The curtain pulled back slowly, revealing the filled auditorium. Students, teachers, parents, even district officials occupied every available seat. Principal Garza had called this assembly Community Accountability and Healing, though most students were already referring to it as the Reckoning in hushed, reverent tones. I waited for the murmuring to settle, for the restless shifting to quiet, before adjusting the microphone. Then I spoke. My name is Maya Reeves. You've seen me in these hallways for years. Some of you remember what happened last week. Some of you witnessed it firsthand. But most of you remember the silence that followed. I took a deep breath, not to steady myself but to savor the moment. The entire room was listening, really listening, perhaps for the first time. They said. I fell because I was weak. But I didn't fall. I was pushed. I was erased. I was doubted. And when I tried to speak up, I was told to be quiet. I looked toward the front row where Dad sat beside Ms. Harmon. Unlike before, he didn't look away. His eyes remained fixed on me, a mixture of regret and pride battling across his features. But strength doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it wheels instead of walks. Sometimes it documents instead of shouts. Sometimes it shows up anyway, even when no one expects it to. My voice didn't waver. I didn't rush. You pushed me, but I didn't fall. I rose, on wheels, on truth, on the power of finally being heard. For a moment after I finished, there was absolute silence. Then it came, not polite, automatic applause, but the thunderous recognition of a community acknowledging its failures and possibilities all at once. Students stood. Teachers wiped away tears. Someone in the back shouted, "Thank you for speaking up." But I didn't smile, because I wasn't there for their approval. I was there for the silence that had finally transformed into something that could hear me. After the assembly, the hallways felt different, lighter somehow, as if a fog had lifted. Students approached me with genuine words, not the careful, distant politeness I'd grown used to. A freshman girl I barely knew touched my shoulder gently as I passed the science wing. "I've been hiding my dyslexia because I was afraid of being treated differently," she whispered. "Your speech made me realize I don't have to be ashamed anymore." 2 sophomores asked if I would help them start a student advocacy group. A junior who used a hearing aid told me he'd been documenting accessibility issues in the school building for months but hadn't known how to bring them forward. "You created a blueprint," he said. "You showed us how to make people listen." Even teachers approached me differently. Mr. Chen, my history teacher who had rarely called on me in class, asked if I would speak to his students about civil disobedience movements. Ms. Winters, who had dismissed my initial report about Olivia, requested a private meeting where she tearfully apologized. "I failed you," she said simply, no excuses, no justifications. "I'm sorry." I accepted her apology not because it erased what happened, but because acknowledging failure is the first step toward meaningful change. Dad was waiting for me in the parking lot after school, leaning against his car with the uncertain posture of someone preparing for a difficult conversation. We hadn't really talked since the day of the recording, not about anything that mattered. "Need a ride?" he asked as I approached. I nodded, letting him help load my chair into the trunk. Not because I needed the assistance, but because I recognized it as his awkward attempt at connection. We drove in silence for several minutes, the radio off, just the sound of tires on pavement filling the car. Finally, at a red light, he spoke. "I've been thinking about the day at Silver Lake Resort," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "When you ended up in the pool." My breath caught. I hadn't expected him to remember that. "You told me you slipped," he continued, fingers tightening on the steering wheel. "But that's not what happened, was it?" "No," I said simply. "That's not what happened." The light turned green. He drove another block before speaking again. "How many times did I miss it? How many times did I choose not to see?" It wasn't really a question he expected me to answer. The words hung between us, heavy with years of overlooked moments and misplaced trust. "I spoke with Aunt Corinne yesterday," he added. "About the broken trophy. About other things I never questioned." I watched his profile, the unfamiliar vulnerability. in his expression. This wasn't about forgiveness, not yet. This was about truth finally breaking through. I failed you, Maya. I'm so sorry. I didn't immediately respond. Healing wouldn't come from one conversation in a car. But it was a beginning. I kept waiting for someone to believe me, I said finally. But I needed to believe myself first. He nodded, eyes fixed on the road. I'm listening now. If you want to talk. When we arrived home, I didn't retreat to my room as I might have before. Instead, I stayed in the living room, and for the first time in years, Dad and I had a real conversation, not about Olivia or what had happened, but about me. My interests. My plans for college. The adaptive technology program I wanted to develop. He listened without interrupting, without checking his phone, without the distracted half-attention I'd grown accustomed to. It wasn't everything, but it was something. A crack in the wall that had grown between us, letting in the first tentative beam of light. That night, I opened my laptop and started a new document. I titled it Visible in bold letters across the top. This would be my proposal for the student advocacy group, not just for wheelchair users but for anyone who had been pushed to the margins, anyone whose voice had been muffled or ignored. As I typed, ideas flowed faster than my fingers could capture them. A mentorship program pairing freshmen with seniors who shared similar challenges. A regular forum where students could safely report instances of exclusion or bullying. A review of school policies with input from those most affected by them. This wasn't about punishment or calling out individuals. It was about changing the system that had allowed someone like Olivia to thrive while others were silenced. Around midnight, I received a text from Jason, "You were amazing today. Meeting tomorrow at lunch to discuss the advocacy group? I've already got 5 people interested." I smiled at the screen. Not just because of his words, but because for the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. The next morning brought rain. The kind of soft, steady downpour that made the school hallways smell like wet jackets and squeaky shoes. I arrived early again, having developed a new appreciation for the quiet moments before the building filled with voices and movement. As I wheeled toward my locker, I noticed something different. The administration had installed a new digital bulletin board overnight, and scrolling across it were photos from yesterday's assembly. There I was, centered on the stage, speaking into the microphone, not cropped out, not pushed to the side, but featured prominently as a central figure in the school community. Beneath the photos ran an announcement: new student advocacy committee forming, first meeting Friday in room 156. All welcome. Principal Garza approached as I was reading it, coffee in hand, looking both tired and energized. "Your idea is already gaining traction," he said. 20 students signed up before school even started today. I nodded, trying to process the speed at which things were changing. "I want you to know," he continued, "the school board is reviewing all our policies on bullying and accessibility. Your courage has illuminated some significant blind spots in our system." It wasn't a perfect response. Policy reviews took time, and systems didn't change overnight. But acknowledgement was the necessary first step. "It shouldn't have taken courage," I replied. "It should have just taken speaking." He nodded slowly, understanding the distinction. "You're right. We're listening now." In English class that morning, Ms. Winters introduced a new unit on personal narrative and testimony. "Words have power," she said, looking directly at me. "Especially when they've been held back for too long." As she distributed the reading list, I noticed it included essays by disabled writers and activists, voices that had never appeared in our curriculum before. Small changes, perhaps, but meaningful ones. At lunch, Jason had reserved the corner table for our impromptu meeting. What I hadn't expected was how many people would show up. The table quickly overflowed, students pulling chairs from nearby, forming a circle that kept expanding. There was Priya, who had lost her valedictorian spot. Eli from the school newspaper. Nadia, who had transferred away but had returned to visit specifically for this meeting. And others, some I recognized as having their own histories with Olivia, others who had faced different battles entirely. "I thought it was just me," Priya said quietly. "I thought I was the only one she targeted. I believed I deserved it somehow," Eli added. "Like maybe I really wasn't good enough for the newspaper." One by one, they shared their stories. Not just about Olivia, but about all the ways they had been made to feel invisible or unworthy. The Muslim student who had been regularly forgotten when forming project groups. The boy with severe anxiety who had been mocked for his medication. The girl whose Spanish accent had been mimicked by teachers who should have known better. I listened, really listened, recognizing that my story was just one thread in a much larger tapestry of silencing and erasure. "So what do we do now?" asked a sophomore I didn't know. "How do we make sure this doesn't just go back to how it was once the attention fades?" It was a valid concern. School scandals had short lifespans. Outrage cooled. People moved on. We document everything, I said. Not just the problems, but the solutions. We create a system that outlasts any single one of us. We spent the rest of lunch period outlining our approach, regular meetings, rotating leadership, direct lines of communication with administration, partnerships with teachers who had proven themselves allies. This isn't about getting even, I emphasized. It's about making space, for everyone. As the meeting concluded, Mr. Garcia appeared with his cleaning cart. He paused, observing our group with quiet approval. You did more than just speak up, he said to me as the others dispersed. You created an echo. That afternoon, Dad texted asking if it was okay for him to attend the Friday meeting of the advocacy group. I want to understand better, he wrote. If you're comfortable with me being there. The fact that he asked rather than assumed felt like its own kind of progress. After school, I visited the physical therapy room, a space I'd avoided in the past because of the pitying looks it often attracted. Today, I went with purpose, seeking out Dr. Ramirez, the PT who worked with students twice a week. I want to start a peer support group, I explained. For students with mobility challenges. But I need some guidance on how to make it truly helpful. Not just performative. She smiled, genuinely pleased by the request. I've been hoping someone would take this on. Let me show you some resources. For the next hour, we discussed accessibility beyond just ramps and elevators, the social barriers, the emotional toll, the ways schools often address the physical needs while ignoring everything else. You know, she said as I prepared to leave, I've worked in 3 different schools, and in each one, the administration thought they were doing enough because they met the minimum legal requirements. It takes someone on the inside to show them what enough really means. That evening, my phone buzzed with notifications as word of the advocacy group spread beyond our school. A local blog had picked up the story. A disability rights organization had reached out offering resources and support. Even a few students from neighboring schools had messaged asking how to start similar groups in their own communities. The momentum was both exhilarating and overwhelming. I had never wanted to be the center of attention, I had only wanted to be seen. Now I was not just seen but watched, looked to for guidance and leadership. I called Jason, needing to process this unexpected development. Are you ready to be the face of a movement? He asked, only half joking. I'm not trying to be the face of anything, I replied. I just want to change how things work at our school. Sometimes that's how movements start, he said. One person just trying to fix their own corner of the world. After we hung up, I sat by my window, watching the rain continue to fall in the darkness. The events of the past week played through my mind like scenes from someone else's life, the fall, the recording, the assembly, today's meeting. The before and after of it all felt so distinct, as if I had crossed some invisible boundary into a new version of myself. My phone buzzed again, a text from a number I didn't recognize. This is Olivia. Can we talk? In person. Please. My breath caught. I stared at the screen, reading and rereading those simple words. A week ago, they would have thrown me into confusion and anxiety. Now, I felt something different, not anger or fear, but a calm certainty. I thought carefully before responding. This wasn't about revenge or even justice anymore. It was about setting boundaries that should have been established long ago. Not ready for that, I typed back. Maybe someday, but not now. I didn't owe her my time or attention. I didn't owe her immediate forgiveness. And recognizing that fact was its own kind of freedom. The next day, a small package waited in my locker, a journal with a note from Ms. Winters, for the story still waiting to be told. Inside the front cover, she had written a quote from Audre Lorde, "Your silence will not protect you." I traced my fingers over the words, understanding them in a way I hadn't before. Silence had never protected me, it had only protected those who wanted me to remain invisible. In history class, Mr. Chen had reorganized the seating to form a circle rather than the usual rows. Today, he announced, we're discussing civil disobedience movements led by people whose contributions are often minimized in textbooks. As the discussion unfolded, I found myself speaking more than I typically would, offering perspectives that connected historical movements to current realities. Other students who usually remained quiet were contributing too, as if the energy in the room had shifted to make space for more voices. After class, a girl named Layla approached me in the hallway. I heard about what happened with Olivia. She said. The same thing happened to me last year with debate team. I never said anything because I thought no one would believe me over her. I would have believed you, I said. She nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. That's why what you did matters so much. You made it possible for the rest of us to speak. 2. At lunch, the advocacy group table had grown again, now occupying a significant portion of the cafeteria. Principal Garza stopped by briefly, bringing news that the school board had approved an emergency budget for additional accessibility improvements and sensitivity training for all staff. It's just the beginning, he acknowledged. But it's a start. Jason leaned over as Principal Garza left. You know what's really changed? He asked. People are paying attention to the small things now, the comments that used to slide by, the jokes that weren't really jokes, the little exclusions. That built up over time. It's like everyone suddenly got new glasses. He was right. The culture was shifting, not dramatically but incrementally, in 1,000 tiny adjustments to how people spoke and acted and perceived one another. After school, Dad picked me up. Again. This time, he had news. I spoke with Olivia this morning, he said as we drove. She wanted to come home, but I told her she needs to stay with your aunt for a while longer. We both need time to process everything. I appreciated that he told me directly rather than making decisions that affected me without my input. She asked about you, he added cautiously. If you were okay. What did you tell her? I said you were more than okay. You were finally being heard. We rode in comfortable silence for a while, the afternoon sun breaking through clouds that had lingered all day. Maya, he said finally, I want you to know something. What you did, standing up, speaking out, it's the bravest thing I've ever seen. And I'm sorry it took me so long to recognize that kind of courage. I didn't cry, though the emotion welled up unexpectedly. Instead, I reached over and briefly squeezed his hand. It wasn't about being brave, I said. It was about being true. That evening, as I prepared for bed, I noticed my reflection in the mirror, the same face, the same eyes, but something had changed in how I carried myself. There was a certainty in my gaze that hadn't been there before, a steadiness in how I held my shoulders. I wasn't defined by what had been done to me. I was defined by how I had transformed it into something powerful. My phone lit up with one final message for the day, from Jason, with a photo attached. It showed the bulletin board outside the main office where someone had posted a simple sign, "Your voice matters here." Below the picture, he had written, "This is how change happens. Not all at once, but day by day, voice by voice. See you tomorrow, Advocate." I smiled at the screen, feeling something settle inside me, not closure, exactly, but purpose. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. Systems resisted change. People fell back into old patterns. But now there was a path forward, one that I had helped create. As I drifted toward sleep, I thought about all the voices that were beginning to rise around me, some hesitant, some bold, all necessary. Mine had been just one. But sometimes one voice was enough to break the silence that kept all the others trapped. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new opportunities to reshape our small corner of the world. And for the first time in years, I was genuinely looking forward to it. They had called it a fall. But this was how I rose. 3 weeks after the assembly, I woke before my alarm, the first pale light of dawn filtering through my blinds. I'd been doing that lately, waking early, eager to start the day rather than dreading it. The change wasn't just in my schedule but in how I approached each morning, with anticipation instead of armor. Today marked the official launch of the Westridge High Student Advocacy Committee, now recognized by the school board as an official organization with funding and faculty support. What had begun as an impromptu gathering in the cafeteria had evolved into something structured and sustainable. Something that would outlast our graduation dates. As I got ready, I noticed the stack of cards on my desk, handwritten notes. From students I barely knew, sharing stories of how they'd found courage in seeing mine. I hadn't expected this ripple effect, this quiet revolution spreading through hallways that once felt so hostile. Dad knocked softly on my door. Need a ride today? I can go in late. Another small change. He no longer assumed what I needed. Or when I needed it. He asked. He listened for the answer. Thanks, I said. That would be great. Downstairs, breakfast waited on the table, not the hurried cereal-ango of our previous routine, but a proper meal with fresh fruit and the cinnamon toast I loved but rarely asked for. Dad sat across from me, coffee mug in hand, the morning news playing softly in the background. Nervous about today? He asked. I considered the question, spreading jam on my toast. Not nervous. Ready. He nodded, understanding the distinction. We ate in companionable silence, the kind that comes when words no longer need to fill every space between people. As we drove to school, Dad cleared his throat. I got a call from your Aunt Corinne last night. Olivia's asked about coming home. For Thanksgiving. My hand stilled in my lap. November was still weeks away, but the mention of Olivia's potential return sent a flutter through my stomach, not fear exactly, but awareness. How do you feel about that? He asked, eyes on the road but attention on my response. The old Maya might have shrugged, might have said it was fine when it wasn't. The new Maya considered her actual feelings before speaking. I'm not sure yet, I said honestly. I'll need to think about it. He nodded again. Take all the time you need. No decisions have been made. And Maya? Your comfort comes first this time. Another change. Small words, enormous shift. At school, the transformation was visible from the moment we arrived. The main entrance now featured a proper ramp alongside the stairs, with a sign directing people to accessible pathways throughout the building. The administration had moved with surprising speed once they recognized the liability issues I'd been pointing out for years. But the physical changes, while necessary, weren't what mattered most. It was the shift in how people moved through these spaces, the awareness, the consideration, the small adjustments in behavior that signaled a deeper understanding. In the main hallway, a group of freshmen noticed me approaching and naturally widened their circle to make room for my chair without interrupting their conversation. No awkward pauses, no exaggerated helpfulness, just simple inclusion. Jason met me by my locker, tablet in hand, already scrolling through the agenda for our first official meeting. The local news called again, he said. They want to do a feature on the committee. Let's wait, I replied. I want us to have actual accomplishments to show, not just good intentions. He smiled, understanding my caution. Too often, initiatives like ours became feel-good stories that faded once the cameras left. We were building for permanence, not publicity. First period was English with Ms. Winters, who had become an unexpected ally in recent weeks. Today, she distributed copies of a new anthology, Disability Visibility, as part of our expanded literature curriculum. Before we begin, she said, addressing the class, I want to acknowledge that this addition to our reading list came directly from student advocacy. Changes like this don't happen without people willing to push for them. She met my eyes briefly. A moment of recognition passing between us. Not gratitude, I hadn't done this for her thanks, but acknowledgement of the distance we'd traveled from that day when she dismissed my truth. The morning passed quickly, each class holding small reminders of transformation. In chemistry, lab partners were now assigned through a random system rather than self-selection, eliminating the subtle exclusions that had been commonplace before. In history, Mr. Chen had rearranged the physical space to ensure everyone had equal access to discussions. But the most profound changes weren't in policies or furniture arrangements. They were in the interactions, the atmosphere, the way students navigated social spaces with new awareness. At lunch, our committee gathered at the large round table we claimed as our meeting spot. 23 students from all grades, representing diverse backgrounds and experiences, brought their trays and notebooks and ideas. Principal Garza stopped by briefly, dropping off official faculty advisor forms. The superintendent wants to attend your next meeting, he mentioned. Your work is getting attention beyond our district. After he left, Priya leaned forward. We need to be careful this doesn't become about publicity for the administration. Our goals need to stay centered on actual change. Agreed, I said. Which is why today's focus is on measurable outcomes. What concrete changes do we want to see by winter break? For the next 40 minutes, we mapped out priorities, a peer mentorship program pairing students with similar challenges, a review of disciplinary policies that disproportionately affected certain groups, improved accommodation processes for students with invisible disabilities. What about Olivia? Someone finally asked, the question hanging in the air like a held breath. I'd been wondering when her name would surface. It had to, eventually. She had been the catalyst, the immediate cause that had exposed a much deeper problem. This was never about just one person, I said carefully. The issue was never just Olivia, it was the system that enabled her behavior and silenced those who spoke against it. Nods around the table. They understood. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about restructuring the environment that had allowed such imbalances of power to flourish. As the meeting concluded, Layla approached me privately. I've been thinking about what happens after you graduate, she said. You've created something important here, but you'll be gone next year. It was a valid concern, one I'd been considering myself. Sustainable change couldn't depend on a single voice or presence. That's why we're documenting everything, I explained. Creating structures that don't rely on any one person. And why we need people like you to step into leadership roles. She looked surprised. Me? Especially you. You've experienced what happens when voices get silenced. You know why this matters. Something shifted in her expression, a recognition of her own potential that perhaps hadn't been visible to her before. After school, I had my weekly check-in with Dr. Ramirez in the PT room. What had begun as consultation about the peer support group had evolved into regular conversations about advocacy and accessibility. I've been watching how you structure the committee meetings, she said as I stretched. Making sure everyone speaks, not just the loudest voices. It's impressive. I had good examples of what not to do, I replied, thinking of all the times I'd been talked over or ignored in group settings. She nodded, understanding the reference. Sometimes our most valuable teachers are the ones who show us what doesn't work. On my way out, I passed the trophy case, the same one that had showcased Olivia's achievements so prominently. The display had been redesigned, now featuring a more diverse selection of student accomplishments. Academic honors shared space with artistic achievements, athletic victories alongside community service recognition. My photo appeared there too, not centralized or emphasized, just present among many others. It wasn't about replacing one spotlight with another. It was about expanding the light to include everyone worthy of recognition. Outside, Dad waited in the pickup zone, reading something on his tablet. He looked up as I approached, a slight furrow between his eyebrows. "Everything okay?" I asked as he helped load my chair. He hesitated before responding. "I got an email from Olivia's therapist. She's been doing some intensive work these past weeks. She wants to write you a letter, not asking for forgiveness, just acknowledgement, I guess." I processed this information carefully. Part of me had been waiting for this moment, the inevitable pressure to reconcile, to forgive, to make things comfortable again for everyone else. "I need to think about that," I said finally. Dad surprised me with his response. "You don't owe her your time or attention, Maya. Not now, maybe not ever. That's entirely your choice." Another shift in our family dynamic, the recognition that my boundaries mattered, that healing would happen on my timeline, not anyone else's. That evening, I received an unexpected email from Mrs. Harmon, the school counselor who had initially dismissed my concerns. She was organizing a district-wide training on recognizing patterns of bullying and emotional abuse, and she wanted my input on the curriculum. "Your perspective would be invaluable," she wrote. "But I completely understand if you prefer not to participate." I sat with this request for a while, considering its implications. There was something powerful in being asked rather than expected. To help, in having my expertise recognized rather than my experience exploited. I drafted a careful response, agreeing to review the materials but setting clear boundaries around my involvement. This too was new, the ability to say yes on my own terms rather than simply accepting whatever was offered. Later, as I worked on homework, my phone buzzed with a text from Jason. He'd sent a photo of a bulletin board at Westridge High, the school across town, student advocacy committee forming, inspired by Westridge initiative. The ripples were spreading beyond our walls, beyond what any of us had anticipated. Change wasn't confined to a single hallway or building anymore. That night, I opened my journal, the one Ms. Winters had given me, and began writing not about the past but about the future. About systems that could be built to protect the vulnerable rather than the powerful. About education that recognized diverse needs without treating difference as deficiency. I wrote until my hand cramped, pages filling with ideas and questions and possibilities. This wasn't just about surviving high school anymore. This was about reimagining what schools could be, what communities could become when every voice was valued. Morning came with unexpected news, an email from the superintendent requesting a formal presentation from our committee at the next school board meeting. "Your initiative has sparked important conversations district-wide," he wrote. "We need to hear directly from students about these issues." The old Maya might have panicked at such visibility, might have worried about saying the wrong thing or drawing too much attention. The new Maya recognized this for what it was, an opportunity to amplify voices that had been systematically silenced. I forwarded the email to our committee members with a simple message: "This isn't just my story to tell. Who wants to speak?" The responses came quickly, Priya offering to address academic discrimination, Eli volunteering to discuss transparency in decision-making, Nadia willing to share her experience as a transfer student who'd found her voice. Each bringing their unique perspective to create a more complete picture. In English class that morning, Ms. Winters introduced a writing assignment, personal essays exploring moments of transformation. "Sometimes," she explained, "we don't recognize the significance of an event until we've had time to process it, to see how it changed us." As my classmates brainstormed topics, I realized I wasn't sure which moment to focus on: the fall itself? The recording? The assembly? None of these felt quite right. The true transformation hadn't come in a single dramatic instant. It had unfolded in the quiet aftermath, in the daily decisions to speak rather than swallow words, to occupy space rather than shrink away. After class, Jason caught up with me in the hallway. "Have you seen this?" he asked, showing me his phone. Someone had started an anonymous Instagram account, Westridge Voices, where students shared stories of times they'd been silenced and how they were reclaiming their voices. "It's not official," he added quickly. "Not connected to our committee. But it's happening because of what you started." I scrolled through the posts, moved by the courage reflected in each one. Some were signed, others anonymous. All were honest. In ways that would have seemed impossible just weeks ago. I didn't start this, I said, handing back his phone. We all did. Everyone who chose to listen differently. At lunch, our committee meeting focused on preparing for the school board presentation. We divided topics, practiced key points, discussed how to frame our recommendations as solutions rather than complaints. Remember, I emphasized, this isn't about assigning blame. It's about creating accountability and moving forward. Principal Garza joined us briefly, bringing news that other schools in the district were forming similar committees. You've created a template others want to follow, he said. That's no small achievement. After he left, Layla raised an important question: what happens when the excitement fades? When this isn't the new thing anymore? It was a valid concern. Initiatives often burned bright then flickered out once the initial energy dissipated. That's why we're focusing on structural changes, I explained. Policies, procedures, documented expectations that don't depend on enthusiasm or individual champions. We spent the remainder of lunch discussing sustainability, how to embed these changes so deeply into the school culture that they would survive graduating classes and changing administrations. After school, I had a scheduled meeting with Dad and Dr. Chen, the therapist he'd started seeing to work through his own role in our family dynamics. These sessions weren't easy. They involved confronting painful truths about patterns of favoritism and dismissal that had shaped our home life for years, but they were necessary for genuine healing. I've been reflecting on something, Dad said as we settled into Dr. Chen's office. All those times I told you not to make trouble, not to rock the boat. I realize now I was really telling myself that. It was easier to silence you than to confront the uncomfortable truth about Olivia's behavior. His candor still surprised me. These weren't easy admissions for a man who had spent years crafting a narrative about his perfect older daughter and his fragile younger one. I'm learning that avoiding conflict doesn't create harmony, he continued. It just drives the real issues underground where they grow stronger. Dr. Chen nodded encouragingly. Maya, how does it feel to hear your father recognize this pattern? I considered the question carefully. It feels like being seen clearly for the first time. Not as someone who needs protection or special treatment, but as someone whose experience deserves validation. We continued talking for the full hour, navigating difficult territories with new language and awareness. The work was ongoing, imperfect, sometimes awkward, but it was happening. The silence that had characterized our relationship for so long was giving way to honest communication. On the drive home, Dad mentioned something unexpected. I found an old video yesterday, from your 8th grade science fair. You built that adaptive controller for video games that could be operated with minimal hand movement. I remembered the project vaguely. It had won an honorable mention but hadn't received much attention beyond that. You were solving accessibility problems even then, he said. I don't think I ever told you how impressive that was. You didn't, I confirmed, but without bitterness. It was a statement of fact, not an accusation. I'm saying it now, he replied quietly. You've always seen possibilities others missed. I'm sorry it took me so long to recognize that gift. At home, I received an email from a local community college inviting me to speak at their education department about inclusive classroom design. Another opportunity one wouldn't have imagined possible a month ago. As I drafted my response, I realized something important. I was no longer defining myself in relation to what had happened. The fall, the recording, the assembly, these were events in my story, but they weren't the whole story. They weren't even the most interesting parts anymore. What mattered now was the work ahead, the systems being built, the voices finding new strength. I was becoming known not as the girl who was pushed, but as the architect of something transformative. That evening, our doorbell rang unexpectedly. Dad answered while I finished an assignment in the living room. I heard murmured conversation, then he appeared in the doorway, expression uncertain. It's Ms. Mitchell, he said. Olivia's mother. She'd like to speak with you. I told her it's entirely your choice. I hadn't seen Ms. Mitchell since the day of the recording. She'd been traveling for work when everything unfolded and had remained largely in the background since then. We'd never been close, her attention as focused on Olivia as my dad's had been. After a moment's consideration, I nodded. Okay. She entered hesitantly, looking smaller somehow, less polished than I remembered. She sat carefully on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly in her lap. I owe you an apology, Maya, she began, voice steady despite her obvious discomfort. Not just for what Olivia did, but for all the times before when I wasn't paying attention. When I chose the easier explanation over the true one. I listened without interrupting, noting the absence of excuses or justifications in her words. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past weeks, she continued. About the environment we created, the dynamics we encouraged without realizing it. About how we adults failed both of you in different ways. This wasn't what I'd expected, not defensiveness or minimization, but genuine reflection. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she added. That's not why I'm here. I just wanted you to know that I see it now, the pattern, the harm, my role in allowing it. And I'm working to change, both for Olivia and for myself. When she finished speaking, the room fell quiet. Dad had discreetly moved to the kitchen, giving us space while remaining nearby. Thank you for saying that, I finally responded. It matters that you came in person. She nodded, understanding that this wasn't resolution or reconciliation, just a necessary acknowledgement of truth. After she left, Dad brought me a cup of tea, setting it on the side table without comment. He didn't press for details about our conversation, respecting the privacy of the moment. You know, I said after a while, I used to think strength meant never showing when you're hurt, never admitting when you need help. He sat beside me, listening. But real strength is setting boundaries. Speaking truth even when it's uncomfortable. Asking for what you need without apology. He reached over, briefly covering my hand with his. You've always been the strongest person in this family, Maya. I just didn't recognize what strength actually looked like. That night, I returned to my journal, reflecting on the day's unexpected developments. There was something powerful in these acknowledgments from the adults who had failed to protect me, not because they erased the harm done, but because they confirmed what I had always known to be true. My reality was finally being recognized, not questioned or minimized. My experience was valid, not imagined or exaggerated. My voice mattered, not despite my differences but because of the unique perspective they provided. The next morning brought sunshine after days of cloud cover. As Dad and I drove to school, I noticed new construction at the main entrance, workers installing automatic doors where manual ones had created barriers for years. You did that, Dad said, nodding toward the activity. Your advocacy made that happen. A lot of people made it happen, I corrected gently. I just helped create the space for those conversations. At school, the day unfolded with its new rhythms and awareness. The Student Advocacy Committee had its regular morning announcement, reminding everyone of upcoming events and resources. Teachers incorporated accessibility checks into their lesson planning. Students moved through spaces with greater mindfulness of who might be navigating alongside them. None of it was perfect. Change never is. There were still moments of thoughtlessness, still instances where old patterns reasserted themselves. But there was also a willingness to recognize these lapses, to adjust, to learn rather than defend. As I wheeled through the main hallway toward my first class, I passed the spot where I had fallen weeks ago. The memory no longer carried the sting it once had. That moment had been painful, humiliating, infuriating, but it had also been transformative. Sometimes it takes being pushed to discover how strong you truly are. In the afternoon, our committee met with district officials to review proposed policy changes. As we discussed implementation timelines and accountability measures, I realized how far we had come from that first impromptu gathering in the cafeteria. We weren't just talking about change anymore, we were creating it, documenting it, ensuring it would outlast our individual presence. After the meeting, Principal Garza pulled me aside. I've been thinking about what happens after you graduate, he said. Would you be interested in helping train next year's committee leaders? Perhaps coming back as a consultant? The offer surprised me. You want my input even after I'm gone? Especially after you're gone, he replied. What you've built here shouldn't end with your graduation. As I headed to my final class of the day, I passed a freshman struggling with books while trying to manage crutches. Without making a scene, I simply pulled alongside. Need a hand? She looked relieved. Yes, please. I'm still figuring out how to carry everything. It gets easier, I assured her, taking some of her books. And there are people who can help show you tricks that work. Would you like to come to our committee meeting tomorrow? The advocacy thing, she asked. I've heard about it. You really think I could join? That's exactly why it exists, I told her. For voices like yours. That evening at home, I finished the personal essay for Ms. Winter's class. I had decided to focus not on the dramatic moments but on the quieter transformation, how I had learned to stop apologizing for taking up space, for having needs, for speaking uncomfortable truths. I titled it simply, Rising. As I completed the final paragraph, I realized something important. This wasn't just about what had happened to me. It was about what I had chosen to create from it. The fall hadn't defined me, my response to it had. They had called it weakness when I hit the ground. They hadn't recognized the strength it takes to rise again, to speak when silence would be easier, to build something new from the rubble of what was broken. They called it a fall. I called it the moment I finally stood up. Up next, you've Got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.